Recording has begun.
Okay, now that we're recording and I have my microphone on, I'll call this meeting to order. And I ask Councilwoman Evelyn Bryant Ward to begin us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If for the record, we do have all of our planning commissioners present. Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Mudd are online. So Commissioner Sampson is an alternate tonight and will be in the audience until he has to leave earlier. So the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Assuming all the commissioners have had a chance to review the minutes, are there any questions or comments about the minutes? Not hearing any. Can I hear a motion to accept?
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion, we accept the minutes.
Mr. Mudd has made a motion to accept. Do I hear a second?
I second.
That was Commissioner Johnson. And since we're not all here, I'll go down, vote by one. Or is there any other discussion before I vote? Okay, Commissioner Banks. Commissioner Evelyn Bryant Ward. Commissioner Johnson. Yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Mudd.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. The minutes are passed unanimously as presented. Next item on the agenda, matters of discussion and review, 3.1 Crane Highway Splash-In Car Wash. This is go to Director Harrington for the staff report.
Okay, good evening, Planning Commission members. For the record, Janine Harrington, Director of Planning for the Town of La Plata. So for this major site plan, we are looking at a car wash. The existing property had a hotel motel, and they are proposing a new automated car wash. The site is approximately 0.92 acres. To the north, south, east, and west are all commercial highway properties. The site plan was first submitted on December 7th of 2021 for the review of a approximately 3,538 square foot car wash. They are planning to demolish the existing hotel motel to make way for this new development. So over the last year, it's been a year, staff has really been working with the applicant to ensure that everything is in compliance with the code. We reviewed it for the resource protection standards. There are no environmentally sensitive features on the site, so it is in compliance with the resource protection standards. For the stormwater management, the site did receive step 3 approval in compliance with the town code. They are proposing a treatment system along with a detention system to satisfy the water quality and underground piping to serve the quantity requirements. For the Chapter 170 streets and sidewalks, this site is in compliance. It will utilize an existing access onto US Route 301. The parking lot has been provided to, or has been designed to provide adequate circulation throughout the site. And they will have 5-foot sidewalks that connect to the overall sidewalk network. And anything, including ramps, will be ADA in compliance. For water and sewer, this was the biggest challenge that we had on the site. And that was what took up most of the review time over the last year. At this point, we are in compliance with water and sewer regulations. They are proposing some reclamation and reuse, which I will allow the applicant to explain in more detail because I'm not as well versed on that. But we did go through that and had Macron review the water and sewer allocations, and everything is in compliance with that at this point in time. For the commercial zoning regulations, they are in compliance with the commercial highway zoning regulations. I won't read through all of those, but you can see that it does meet the minimum requirements. They are providing lighting in compliance with the Chapter 191-41 lighting standards. For the parking requirements, they are required to provide 2 parking spaces. They're providing 4, and they need 1 loading space, and they are providing that loading space. They are not requesting a waiver from the town code on that. For the landscaping, they are in compliance. They need a minimum of 800 square feet of landscaping, and they will be providing 925 square feet. And in accordance with the 2020 comprehensive plan, it is in compliance with the land use element, which shows the site as commercial, and the maximum street frontage has been achieved with this project. For goal number 10, plan upgrades and enhancements to the town's wastewater infrastructure. The applicant will be utilizing, as I mentioned before, the reclamation system for gray water and reduce the amount of water that's discharged into the town's sewage system. For transportation elements, they are providing sidewalks in accordance with that section of the comprehensive plan. And with that, in conclusion, staff is recommending approval of the major site plan in accordance with the town code and the 2020 comprehensive plan. If you have any questions of me, I'm happy to answer those. And we do have the applicant here should you have any questions of them.
Mr. Chairman, this is John Mudd, and maybe this is a question more for the applicant. I applaud the effort to reuse gray water as part of this operation, and I was curious in terms of what sort of percentage they may be able to reclaim and reuse, in terms of new water versus gray water.
Any questions or comments for Director Harrington first? And I know Councilwoman Evelyn Bryan Ward does have a comment.
I do. So in the narrative, it states that there are no steep slopes or highly erodible soils present on site. But if this is the hotel that's next to the old Wills building, is that correct? Behind the Wills building, there water sits. It is very high, and I can only think that it's coming from that hill because that area behind the Wills building and Marie's Diner is very flat, and so water just pools there. So I'm not sure that it doesn't, cause a water issue.
That's part of the grading on the site and the stormwater management. That's why they have to install the stormwater management facilities in order to collect any water that's on the site.
So if they're not aware that it does that, how do they address something they're not aware of? Because it says there are no steep slopes. Well, it is because it goes down into that parking lot behind the Wills building.
I don't think it's on this site.
It's the site next to the Wills building that the old hotel that used to.
The property that you are referencing is completely separate from
Okay.
the hotel property.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comment? Any other questions, comments for Director Harrington from the commissioners? Okay, so can we move to the applicant? Let's have the applicant speak, and Commissioner Mudd, I'll make sure we get back to your comment. So, and for the applicant, could you let us know your name so that we have that for the record?
Good evening, esteemed commissioners. My name is Bhupendra Prakash. I am a registered engineer responsible for the design and coordination of this plan to this stage. I have to my left is an owner representative, Ms. Renee Montgomery. She works with the Wills Group, and together we shall present this project. as you wish us to. But this project is indeed on the lands of the motel, just south of, can you hear me? Just south of the old Wills Group building. And one thing for sure is that this project, as we have designed and as has been required by town staff, is to implement the latest standards of environmental drainage, namely detention to avoid flood control and treatment to avoid discharge of stormwater that has not gone through a sand filter and the necessary cleansing, so to speak, of our storm drainage. We have essentially proposed to demolish the entire building and rebuild upon it this car wash facility with the appropriate parking, lighting, landscaping, and access from the state right-of-way. We have taken time to present the architecture to the review board, and we have come to a point where that architecture has been found acceptable and approved. To achieve the necessary detention, which is a flood control mechanism, we have large underground storage pipes to hold the rainfall runoff to the point where it is discharged only after the rainfall has peaked. And this is what the benefit we bring to this site as opposed to the existing condition, which has no such mechanism. We are proposing to you with this approval that hopefully you will vote for. You will indeed have perhaps the best practice to date on this ground. And with that, I would just ask Ms. Renee Montgomery to introduce her company as to what we hope to achieve here.
Thank you, Boop. My name is Renee Montgomery. I'm the Senior Real Estate Manager for the Wills Group. I don't know how much introduction the Wills Group actually need in this room. I'm used to doing a very long story of 100 years in business and continually evolving and reinvesting in our properties. This is the 19th property that we own in Charles County. We have at least 11 or 12 major capital investment projects either recently completed in permitting or planned for our pipeline for almost all of our locations in Charles County. This will be an addition and in retail synergy with our other local locations. I don't know if you have any other questions, but I'm happy to answer them. I cut my presentation on the Wills Group a little short for this audience.
So we are here to answer any questions that you have, operationally or technically.
Let's start with Commissioner Mudd. You had a question or comment about reclamation?
Excuse me, Chairman Gang, before the petitioner answers Commissioner Mudd's question, I'd like to add a tag to that. It's the same sort of line of questioning around reclamation. So my question is, adding to Commissioner Mudd's question is, why did you choose reclamation over recycling? And can you talk about the environmental benefits and distinctions between the two?
I think you can answer.
Yeah.
Yes, Boop will answer. I don't know if
This
that
microphone.
doesn't like you.
Well, a car wash employs both reclamation as well as recycling. There's a slight difference. First of all the wash water from a car wash, mud, grease, oil, sands, they go into an underground separator box. And that separator box settles out and baffles the solids from the liquid. That solid is reclaimed. Reclaimed in the sense that once every quarter, a truck comes and vacuums out all of that solid, hauls it away. And then that water goes through 2 other tanks to baffle and clean itself until we get 1,000 gallons of used water to recycle for the wash. So first you separate, and then second, you baffle to get clean enough water without sediments to go back into the wash cycle. And then the final cycle of this wash is fresh water in the amount of 10 to 14 gallons of fresh water cycle. One commissioner asked, what is the percentage? I would say about 80% of the wash water is reused.
It does, just as a follow-up, the waste that is removed, is that considered hazardous waste or is it,
It is taken to an appropriate landfill.
so it's solid waste?
Yes, it's solid waste.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mudd, has your question been addressed?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so you've raised another question that I didn't have, because I was going to ask questions about that too. You indicated that the stormwater management is going to be made up of underground water tanks, but you also have water tanks for this reclamation and recycling.
Yes.
They're separate tanks?
Well, let's clarify that there are 2 sets of tanks. One set drains into the storm sewer, which goes under the road, which goes to the streams. And the other one inside the car wash is the sanitary sewer, which goes to the treatment plant.
So let me ask the question a different way. What is the net impact on our wastewater treatment plant from this project?
The net impact is, I would estimate that it adds 12 gallons of fresh water for every wash. And that 12 gallons, I would say, is not very different to what a series of flushes of the hotel or the existing hotel would have produced. But the frequency, how many such flushes, is a separate question that cannot be scientifically proven. It's empirical. How many washes do we expect per day at 12 gallons per wash? We consulted with the department. We came up to the solution that the sanitary sewer does have capacity to take that. And I believe, Janine, we are being charged quite a bit of hefty sum for the facility impact. Can you state what that sum is?
I don't recall what the number is off the top of my head. If you have additional questions, I can look it up real quick.
Are there additional questions, comments from the commissioners for either the applicant or Director Harrington? Okay, I have one. You're proposing to put a car wash here that is very close to an existing car wash that's already in operation further south down the road. How does that make sense?
That's a marketing question that I would not be able to answer as an engineer. I'll ask Renee, who represents the business aspect of this application.
I would say that they're completely different types and styles, and the demand for the differences are completely separate. You have a tunnel car wash. It's a very fast full service, inactive for the user, more of a seamless service as opposed to, you're talking about the manual wash. That's the completely different, segment of the market.
So I may not have the language correct, but maybe this will work. How many bays? Car wash bays will
This
will
would
yours,
just be one. It's a tunnel car wash. You just drive through. You don't do anything.
just one?
Yes, you just drive through.
The drawing seems to infer a lot more.
Well, there are two types of car washes where you drive in to several bays, 5 or 6, that's the old style, and you either wash your car, or there is a tunnel, which is proposed here, I think.
I see. Okay.
I think this
I
is
understand that
be
now.
the only type in town where you drive through and a conveyor pulls you through.
Understand. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments for either the applicant or Director Harrington? And Director Harrington, I think you were looking up a cost. That's not important to me. I don't know
You
if it's
can't seem to
important the
find
other
it, but it is
commissioners.
definitely a hefty sum, I will say that. The base EDU factor for a major facility fee is 16,210. So you can multiply that by many EDUs. So you're in the tens of thousands of dollars that they'd be paying for that.
Okay.
And that is to go towards any upgrades or modifications for the wastewater treatment plant and infrastructure.
So any other questions or comments from the commissioners for Director Harrington or the applicant? So Director Harrington has proposed that we accept this proposal. Do I hear a motion?
Chairman Gann, I move that we approve the major site plan to construct the new car wash as presented.
So we have a motion. Is there a second?
Chairman Gann, I second that motion.
And we have a second. Any further discussion? Okay, then I'll go down the list for a vote. Commissioner Johnson, yes or no?
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
Commissioner Mudd?
Yes.
Commissioner Banks?
Yes.
Commissioner Bryant Ward?
Yes.
I also vote yes. The motion is approved unanimously. Thank you both very much for your participation.
We thank all of you.
Yes, we'll see you in future meetings.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
It has taken us a year to come to date. We thank all of you. We thank Janine and her able staff. And we are happy to go to construction as soon as Janine allows us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is, are we going to be handling these one at a time or?
That's up to you. It's Pine Grove, we separated it out into two final plats because they want to be able to record them at separate times if needed. So it's really the final plats for neighborhood O. It's got all the information, so if you wanted to save some time, we can certainly look at these as together.
Okay. I guess for the way the agenda was put together, it'd probably be cleanest to cover each one as they are. So the first one would be Pine Grove Neighborhood O as an Oscar Phase 1. And we'll go to Director Harrington for the staff report.
I will give a brief summary since it's a lot of the same information, but this is for Pine Grove Neighborhood O Phase 1 final plat. The site is 21.99 approximately acres. The applicant had submitted their final plat for the Phase 1 of Neighborhood O, which will create 48 lots. The preliminary plat for Neighborhood O was reviewed and approved on April 5th of 2022 for the total of 68 single-family dwelling units. And since they are subject to the Development Rights and Responsibilities Agreement, which was approved in November of 2021, they are covered for their school seat allocations through the Charles County Development Rights and Responsibilities Agreement. To date, and Mr. Scott, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, I think you've purchased 400 single-family dwelling units for school seats.
That's correct, yes.
So they are covered for not only neighborhood K, but also neighborhood O. So again, it's lots 1 through 48, and it will create 12.72, a little bit more than that, acres of open space. It is in compliance with the preliminary plat and in accordance with the town code, and therefore staff is recommending approval of the Pine Grove Neighborhood O Phase 1 final plat in accordance with the town code. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Yeah, that was a typo on my part. I sometimes like to reuse staff reports because it saves me some time. And so as I was going through the criteria for approval and findings, I skipped right over that little blip, which is generally a consistent piece of text in the staff report. So that was my error. It should have been neighborhood O, not neighborhood K.
So just to be clear, we're talking about neighborhood O Phase 1.
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Scott, are you representing the applicant for this?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Anything to add?
For the record, Steve Scott, on behalf of the applicant. Also with us virtually are the developer, the surveyor, and the civil engineer. Just want to recognize that Griffin Burns, Aaron Worley, and Chris Lazarton are with us on the computer. Nothing to add. We just take notice of the fact that the staff report finds compliance with applicable codes and ordinances and recommends approval. And we're certainly available to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay, any questions or comments from the commissioners for either Director Harrington or Mr. Scott?
Mr. Chairman, this is John Mudd. I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to have some general questions about Pine Grove, which I can hold to the end of these 3 items. The questions I have really don't have any bearing on these 3 agenda items. So again, I don't want to delay anything, but just to let you know that before we move on to the next item, I had a couple of questions on the overall project. Thank you.
Let me make a note of that. Okay, any other questions or comments from commissioners for Director Harrington or the applicant? Okay, so Director Harrington has recommended that we approve the final plat for Phase 1 of Neighborhood O. Can I entertain a motion, please?
Chairman Gann, I recommend that I motion that we approve the recommendation for Pine Grove plat 0. Oh, not 0. My apologies.
O Phase 1.
That's Phase 1, yes. Sorry.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Chairman Gann, I second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, I'll go to vote. Commissioner Mudd,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Bryant Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Banks.
Yes.
I also vote yes. So neighborhood O Phase 1 has been approved. Let's move on to neighborhood O Phase 2. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the Phase 2 for neighborhood O is approximately 6.5, a little more than that, acres. If I could turn my page. So Phase 2 will create 20 lots within the neighborhood O subdivision. Again, the preliminary plat was approved on April 5th for the total, and they are covered by school seat allocations. Along with proposing to create lots 49 through 68, they will also include a little over 2.44 acres of open space. And again, this is in compliance with the preliminary plat and the town code, and staff is recommending approval as presented. And again, I have a typo. It's not neighborhood K, it's neighborhood O.
Anything to add, Mr. Scott?
As before, Mr. Chair and commission members, nothing further unless you have questions of us.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the commissioners? Not hearing any, Director Harrington has recommended we make a motion to approve Pine Grove Neighborhood O Phase 2 final plat. Do I hear a motion?
Chairman Gann, I move that we accept the final plat for Neighborhood O Phase 2 as presented.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Johnson. I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll go for the vote. Commissioner Banks,
Yes.
Commissioner Bryant Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mudd,
Yes.
and I also vote yes, also approved. So now we move on to Pine Grove Neighborhood A Alpha. Director Harrington?
So for Pine Grove Neighborhood A, we are looking at the preliminary plat this evening. So this site is approximately 236 attached dwelling units or townhomes. The size is 35 acres. The proposed density is 19.88 acres. So that brings the overall density to date at 11.26. So this application for the preliminary plat, again, it's 236 attached units. I won't go through the full background. I think we've gone over that quite a bit to date. I have provided an updated major milestones for the project, including the all the way up to neighborhood O. And of course, we approved the phase 1 and phase 2 final plats tonight, so that will be added to the next time. So with the neighborhood A, it is in compliance with the master site development plan. There are no minimum lot coverage, minimum lot area, lot widths, or setbacks required. However, the applicant is proposing to have 20-foot front setbacks, 25-foot rear setbacks, and 5-foot side setbacks. I already mentioned the total density of 19.88 dwelling units. As noted in the town code and within the master site development plan, the overall development must achieve 6.5 to 15 dwelling units per acre. Therefore, each individual neighborhood density will vary in order to achieve that overall goal. So I did do a breakdown, and I'll continue to do this on each section as we come forward, so that way we can keep track of it and make sure that we're still in compliance with the overall density. So I have neighborhood O, K, and A. So you can see that with the 42.613 acres, that's the total acreage within the lots, not accounting the open space, that's separate. And with 480 dwelling units, that's 11.26 dwelling units per acre. So that's where we are to date. So for the overall preliminary forest conservation plan, they have received approval for the updated preliminary forest conservation plan. The site is clearing 656.25 acres of forest and will retain 246.91 acres in permanent forest conservation easements. They also have 56.61 acres of reforestation and 12.85 will be replanted on the site. They will need 87.49 acres to be provided off-site, and that is at a 3-to-1 ratio, I believe. So if you're doing off-site, you have to plant at a higher density than you would if you were retaining on-site. So this will, off-site reforestation will be determined with their final forest conservation plan review. Step 2, stormwater management has been reviewed and approved in accordance with this section. They are utilizing submerged gravel wetlands and grass swales throughout the site to treat impervious area and to the maximum extent practicable. Development is required to provide at least 75,115 cubic feet of sediment and erosion control, or environmental site design, and they are providing 76,449 cubic feet. So they are exceeding that minimum. For these streets and sidewalks, The development will have 3 secondary local roads designed in accordance with the Charles County Design Manual, which we have adopted by policy to make sure that our roads are consistent with the county. The neighborhood will have primary access on La Plata Parkway to Rosewick Road, and the road names will need to be submitted to Charles County Addressing in order to proceed with creating individual addresses. The site will also feature 6-foot wide sidewalks with ADA compliant ramps at intersections. I will note the traffic impact study that has been on everybody's mind and refer back to the letter that we reviewed on March 29th, 2021 regarding the traffic impact analysis and how we're going to be proceeding forward with that. So as with the Neighborhood K and Neighborhood O, they had done an updated traffic impact study and we came to the consensus that at certain milestones, the traffic impact study would be updated. That was set at every 750 dwelling units built or every 3 years, whichever is sooner. And there will also be warrants in place to ensure mitigation is constructed at each of those milestones. So we have not yet reached that point. As I mentioned, we're around 480 dwelling units, and we have not yet reached a 3-year mark either. So we are not yet due for that, but that will be coming up in the next couple of years. Or if they do a big boom and try to move forward with more housing, then we'll have to evaluate that sooner. So for the dedication of reservation of parkland, the site has provided approximately 16.069 acres, which are open spaces, parcels A through H. This will connect to the walking trail along La Plata Parkway, and the nature trail will connect to the future neighborhood E to the south of the site. In accordance with the town code, they were required to provide 25% as open space, including 5% as public use space. And in neighborhood A, the open space is equivalent to 46% of the total inland area and also includes floodplain, wetlands, streams, and steep slopes, which are then being preserved and protected from development. For the street trees, they are providing 157, or they were required to provide 157 trees, and they will be proposing a minimum of 157 trees. There is a list of species listed on the plans that they can choose from. In accordance with the town's policy, they have provided, or they will be providing a minimum of 80% native tree species and not more than 5% non-native. That's our Keep La Plata Beautiful initiative. We want native trees. Spread the word. As shown on sheet 3 of the plan set, the strips will be at least 7 feet wide to accommodate street trees and prevent interference with utilities. Water and sewer connections are being provided in compliance with this section. The water and sewer capacity is currently being analyzed. They do submit water and sewer studies to the town, and that is also being reviewed and approved by Macron Engineering. That is kind of handling our overall water and sewer review throughout the town. And I will get into this later on with our development updates, our planning department updates. But we are working with the our director of operations, the town attorney, and Macron to look at a development capacity analysis and kind of check to see where we are, where we can go with our water and sewer capacity, and when we kind of run out or we need to make sure that we have a plan in place to accommodate water and sewer connections. And then with the 2020 comprehensive plan, I've noted this in most of my other staff reports, but in conformance with the master site development plan and the preliminary plats, that it is in compliance with the comprehensive plan. So staff is recommending approval of the Pine Grove Neighborhood A preliminary plat in accordance with the town code with the condition, and this is the same condition that we are bringing over for the traffic impact study, that the applicant shall submit updates to the traffic impact study for review and approval by Charles County Government, State Highway Administration, and the town at certain milestones as mutually agreed to. Each traffic impact study shall be developed in accordance with the Charles County APF manual using the development district standards. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have of me, or if you have any questions for the applicant.
Anything to add, Mr. Scott?
Mr. Chair, certainly not to belabor any of the points on the staff report. We do accept the staff report, and we do accept of course, the ongoing condition in the staff report related to the traffic impact analysis. Our traffic engineer, of course, works quite extensively in the town. The work is ongoing to the next, for the next update to that traffic impact analysis. And of course, it'll be ready on time when we get to the milestones. And obviously, as the work proceeds, if there are any questions in the meantime, the traffic engineer is always available to answer those questions. And of course, the key to this particular submission is this is the natural evolution and the next step of development of this phase of the project. And the key is the consistency with the master site development plan that was approved in 2021. Staff report notes consistency with the ordinance, the zoning ordinance that is. And again, we're certainly available to answer any questions you might have.
So I would have a comment for Director Harrington. You're recommending approval with the TIS conditions. And I think what I just heard you say made it more clear to me than what I read. There are milestones for the timing of the TIS, and it looks like I'm seeing the heads nodding
Correct.
and affirmatively that those milestones are intended to be met.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, and we do accept that condition.
Yes, and we are working with Charles County Government and State Highway on that. So they have, we set it, and that's why I didn't include the specific numbers in there, because we wanted to say that it was what we mutually agreed to, that it was 750 dwelling units or 3 years, whichever came sooner.
Right.
So we are keeping an eye on that, and that's why I'm also following through the density calculations and keeping an eye on the number of units. And I also think it's important to note that with the way that they're doing the development, we have neighborhood K and neighborhood O, which are going to Charles Street and La Plata Road. And then this section is going to Rosewick Road. So it's not that all of the development for this neighborhood is going to bombard one section or another. I think that's important to point out, that they are trying to make sure that they don't overrun the roads with any one section at one time.
Okay, any questions or comments from the commissioners for either Director Harrington or Mr. Scott?
Chairman Gann,
Yes.
I do have a question. When we initially started talking about this a year or so ago, a school representative came out because he was concerned about the impact of the traffic around the school. Was that taken into consideration, and did we come up with a resolution to that? They felt that the traffic right there at the high school and I think it's a middle or elementary school. And he was really concerned about that, and he wrote this really elaborate letter. And I would
We have
hope-
him in the audience tonight.
Oh, okay. And so I wanted to make sure that we address that, because that was a huge concern. And, you know, I've actually lived on 488 and had to go by that school, and the traffic backs up bad.
So we haven't gotten a final design or anything at this point in time. We are continuing discussions on that. I think that at this point, we all kind of recognize that we're trying to make an interparcel connection there and to create a upgrade at that intersection to not only benefit the school, but for the traffic along that roadway and the neighborhood. So we are looking at the different options that are available and how it would be best to connect through there if we were to do that. But it's going to take some design work and some
Okay.
planning, since that is a private road at this point. It's not owned by the town. So we'd have to work with the Board of Education to work that
But
through.
we are keeping it at the forefront.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners for Director Harrington or Mr. Scott?
Chairman Gann, I do have a question. And you may have said, I apologize, Janine and Mr. Scott. What is the cadence of the updates for the traffic impact analysis? And what is the expectation on the number of studies that will be performed based on that cadence?
So that was the 750 units or 3 years, whichever comes sooner. That's the timing. I think that we've also, and actually you might have an update if we, I think we're trying to get the light in at Charles Street sooner rather than later. I know we haven't met the warrants yet, but I think,
So Jamie Kendrick from Mead and Hunt.
So before you,
Sure.
can you, when you say units, can you tell me what you mean when you say units?
The number of houses built.
Okay, so
And-
in terms of the timeline, the number of updates that are expected around the traffic impact analysis studies, what is the cadence of those? What is the timing of those is my question. It's based on the units, is that what you're saying?
Based on units or the number of years, whichever comes sooner. So
the
if they,
700 or the 3 years?
correct.
And a townhouse and a single-family dwelling are both counted as one unit each?
It's a unit, yes.
We
So I
should also
apologize.
mention, I'm sorry, did I interrupt? I'm sorry.
I probably did, and I apologize. I was just going to yield back to the gentleman, and I apologize for.
We should also mention too that there are ongoing mitigation efforts as the project proceeds during that cadence of traffic impact analysis. Director Harrington just mentioned, I think, the traffic signal or the intersection signal at La Plata Parkway and Charles Street. And of course, the developer has always taken a position that they'll install that light as soon as the State Highway Administration will permit it. And I think Mr. Kendrick might have had an update on that.
Sure. Good evening, Jamie Kendrick, Mead and Hunt. In fact, about 6 weeks ago, we learned that the state has approved the installation of the signal at La Plata Parkway and Maryland 6, and that the signal is in design, and I don't want to speak for the developer, but I would think that certainly at this point, by the end of the calendar year, it should be well installed, I would think.
I'm not sure on timing. I don't know if anybody else on the developers team on the computer can give us a better idea on timing on the installation of that light.
Mr. Scott, could you call upon a specific person to answer that question?
Let me withdraw my comment about the timing. But certainly we understand in writing from SHA that the signal has been approved and it is currently in design by the developer.
Well, Jamie, the cat's out of the bag. I think we are interested in,
We can only
we understand it's not,
reinstall that
Cast in
cat in
granite,
that
but-
bag.
do you have a feel for when the,
I just, now, we're, okay, so our team is muted. Griffin is trying, and we need the
Ah.
guest unmuted. The joys of cell phones.
Hey, everybody, this is Griffin for the applicant. Can everyone hear me okay?
yes,
As in terms of the signal construction, the gentleman that spoke earlier is spot on. We are in design currently. As soon as we receive approved plans, we'll be moving on to ordering materials and construction. I think by the end of this year is a safe assumption, but as everybody knows, we're dealing with supply chain challenges on numerous fronts. That's my only major concern, but end of the year seems reasonable at this point in time.
so approximately a year away is a reasonable estimation. Okay,
Yes, sir.
Certainly not later than,
right,
I would
okay.
think.
Any other questions or comments for Director Harrington or Mr. Scott and team? Okay, not hearing any. Director Harrington has recommended that we review and approve, or actually that we approve this preliminary plat for neighborhood A with the condition of the traffic study timeline. So I wait for a motion.
Chairman Gann, I move that we accept the preliminary plat for neighborhood A with the stated conditions.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
This is Tracy Johnson. I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there any further discussion? Not hearing any. I'll go roll call. Commissioner Banks,
Yes.
Commissioner Bryant Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mudd.
Yes.
I also vote yes. So it passes unanimous. So Mr. Scott, thank you and your team
Thank
for
you very
being
much.
here.
Should I stay put? I think Mr. Mudd has some questions.
Oh, good reminder. I had that on my notice. I was going to turn the page. Commissioner Mudd, you had some general comments regarding Pine Grove?
I do. Thank you very much. Wanted to quickly refer to a letter of February 14th, 2022 by the planning director to Mr. Linhart. And this letter was after the review of a revised traffic impact study and had a series of recommendations as a result of that review and what were viewed as potential mitigation necessities. The first condition of approval relates to neighborhoods I, J, and K. And one of the conditions is that the installation of the traffic signal at La Plata Parkway and Maryland Route 6 would need to occur. I am encouraged by tonight's discussion and to hear that, in fact, that signal has been approved by State Highway and is under design. That is a critical intersection, not a year from now, but very, very soon. The letter goes on and conditions other improvements related to the future approvals of neighborhood D, E, F, G, and H. It contains comments related to the State Highway Administration and what they see as mitigation requirements, including the potential improvement at 301 and 225, so on and so on. The letter ends by stating very well that the town staff is recommending that the client prepare a package of improvements to mitigate the adverse impacts and to meet with town staff as soon as possible to discuss. Once a package of improvements have been agreed to, it shall be memorialized in an agreement with the town. And I think that's my central focus for this project. It sounds as if there have been meetings and discussions about these potential and likely necessary mitigation proposals. But my interest as a member of the Planning Commission is to see that these are memorialized in an agreement so there's no question in the future as we proceed with this project, who's responsible for what, and more importantly, the time frames needed for these improvements. I appreciate the fact that the traffic study is going to continue to be studied ad nauseum over the next 3-year periods. I'm not sure that's necessary. I think from my perspective and my history with these issues, I think we know the final full impact of this project, which is going to create in many areas of the town adverse impacts to the traffic system. I think everybody can see that. The simple way to determine the full impact is to do a complete and thorough traffic study based on the final design year. What that study tells you is the maximum impact the project will have on the road systems at that point in time. But again, I applaud the efforts to continue the studies, and I would hope that work continues in terms of developing a mitigation package that can be memorialized, and is certainly something I think the Planning Commission needs to be apprised of as we proceed towards the future neighborhoods for the project. So I guess it's not so much a question as more of a statement of what my concerns have been for this project from day one. I'm encouraged by the discussions I've heard tonight and hope we can continue the positive movement towards a mitigation package that everyone will be satisfied with at the end of the day. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So Director Harrington or Mr. Scott, you want to add anything to that?
I'll add on behalf of the applicant that I took some detailed notes, and obviously we'll be mindful of Commissioner Mudd's comments as we move forward. And of course, we are, in any event, working closely, of course, with the town and our traffic engineers. And at this point, using the county APFO, I would expect if and when the town adopts their adequate public facilities ordinance, maybe that will be put in play. But for now, using the standard in the county APFO.
So Mr. Scott's just set up a perfect segue to the next item
You're
on the
welcome.
agenda. Before we proceed to that, any other questions or comments from commissioners regarding Pine Grove? Not
Thank you very
hearing any.
much.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Scott, and your team, and
Thank you.
see you next time. Next item on the agenda is Chapter 191, Draft Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance. Want to make sure the commissioners are aware that we're not being asked to vote on anything here. We have Jamie here to provide us some lead us through preliminary discussion on an adequate public facilities ordinance for the town of La Plata. So I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. It's good to be back. And I am glad to follow up Mr. Scott's comments and Commissioner Mudd's comments to say that we have made progress on some issues at Pine Grove. And then, as you know, we're working on some issues in the southwest quadrant as well with the growth in that area. And I think that actually kind of frames one of the questions that I wanted to talk about tonight is what is the right approach for the town of La Plata? So if we get am I controlling the slides or somebody else? All right, first slide. I think that kind of frames much of the issue here. La Plata is not Charles County. La Plata is not Prince George's County. You are relatively, constrained in terms of the roads for which you are responsible, the roads that you can regulate, although you have, plenary land use authority adjacent to those roads. And so, to me, as we start to talk about an APF, you have both the legal considerations as well as the kind of practical considerations, which all tie back to what are the goals, right? So I'll come to that, the goals in a second. But once we start to talk about the goals, I would encourage you to think about some of these questions. Is an APF, and by the way, I should say, I would have been among the people pushing, staff and others to move on an APF because we keep having some of these very awkward conversations with developers about the county standards, the state standards, what the town would like to see, what the right mitigations are, who's in control of them, et cetera, et cetera. But as I've done that, been doing the analysis and thinking about this, I think one of the questions that has repeatedly come up in my mind is an APF the right tool for the town of La Plata? In the context of the roads, again, that you control, and what you can reasonably expect out of any development as it may come along. There's a very different set of, if you ultimately think about this in terms of what are the improvements that you might gain, what can reasonably be expected from a 20 or a 40 or a 50 unit development versus a 1,600 unit development? How does the scale of both the impact and the mitigation come together? And so in that context, an APF may or may not be the right tool, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the kind of the four questions about is this the right tool is, can you justify a set of standards? Do you have we'll call it in layman's terms, a traffic problem, right? And I think we could certainly justify having an APF based on existing and future levels of service. So I think that we can check that box. Do you have an accompanying plan or mechanism to bring facilities to adequacy? Well, and this is where scale comes in. You have a town comprehensive plan, which I think we show in a couple of pages, and some improvements, but frankly, most of those improvements are likely beyond the capacity of the town in and of itself to implement. Certainly, many of them are beyond any specific developer's capacity to implement as standalone entities. So, do you have a plan? Probably. Do you have the mechanisms and the resources to bring facilities to adequacy? Maybe or maybe not. We should talk about that as we go forward. And so, do you pass an APF that says developer shall accept, and then everything is an accept, right? Is one of the things to think about. Do you have agreement on what is adequate? So I shouldn't say, there is a universal set of level of service standards, which I don't even want to begin to talk about, except to say that there's generally accepted engineering standards. Those aren't necessarily appropriate to a small town. They tend to be very vehicle oriented, traffic oriented, and not multimodal or network oriented. And so you need to think about, can you all agree on what the right kind of mix of transportation strategies is? How much congestion are you willing to accept, for example, in certain areas in order to get the types and character of development that you want, right? It's the, you know, in general, one accepts that in a more downtown area, you're going to have a little more traffic. In a rural area, you're not. You kind of cross through some of that here. So can we agree on what is adequate and how we define that? And finally, do you have the sufficient resources and data to monitor growth, trends, and facility capacity? And I think the answer to that one is probably yes. You do. You certainly have, you know, very competent technical staff that do that. You have the resources of, you know, consultants, state, county agencies. So those are some of the questions to think about. Is APFO the right tool for the county or for the town? Excuse me. The next set of questions is, do you have the sufficient span of control to influence adequacy? Right? What roads do you own and control of that are kind of, for want of a better term, of consequence? You don't control 488, you don't control Radio Station Road, you don't control 301, 6, you're down to like Willow Lane and LaGrange and St. Mary's and your neighborhood streets. So again, you know, your ability, or even if you were to mandate a developer to do something, their ability to do an improvement is dependent upon the consent of the county or the state. So kind of where does your span of control come in there? And the county or state, and we've had some robust discussions, shall we say, with the county and the state about adequacy, you know, with respect to Pine Grove, right? That, you know, the traffic study, you know, for better or worse, is very focused on adequacy of, you know, state roads. Well, that may or may not be the biggest concern for the town. I mean, to some extent, you know, how do I say this bluntly? That's how I speak. Do you really care at the end of the day, except for maybe one intersection, how 301 functions? Is that your problem? Right? Or, you know, are you more concerned about some of your, you know, local roads, et cetera? So, you know, traffic impact studies tend to be very focused on, you know, major facilities and not paying attention to the details of, you know, kind of the micro network, if you will.
May I interrupt and ask a question there? What would we consider Roswick Road? Is that a county road?
So Roswick, east of 301 is county, right? West, I guess, is not Roswick. What? Yeah, Roswick is the county.
County road. Okay, thank you.
Can APFs be applied to roads not owned by the town? Sure, absolutely. You can have, again, you can have traffic impacts, I think measure anything you want to measure. Again, can you force a solution upon a higher level of government? No.
So is the county in any better shape? I mean, they don't own the major roads that run through the county either.
Correct. So here's what I think, and I'll use the very simple example of these flashing beacons that we've been working on for a while on Maryland 6. You have control when you have money. More control when you have money. If you would witness the state and those flashing beacons languished for years, town says, you know what? We will pay for the design. We will take care of the right of way. We will put up cash. Please just install the beacons. And what did the state do? They're installing the beacons, right? So money talks, I think, when it comes to transportation management in some respects. So is it better for you to try and force, you know, square pegs into round holes through traffic studies and APFs, or is it better to have, you know, an excise tax, for example, or impact fee that you can bring to the table to say, hey, county, we're going to contribute X number of dollars to make Y improvement. So that's, I mean, I think that's a big policy question. And you all, as a municipality, actually have far different authorities than a county government, and that you can implement a impact fee or excise tax without state approval. The counties have to go to the state to get those.
I see
approvals.
a bigger point to Evelyn's question, and the way I see it is important. I think you touched on it, Jamie, that there has to be open communication between the town, the county, and the state on all of these issues. It can't, I don't want to take your words out of context, but it shouldn't come down to a point where, okay, I want these blinking lights. I'm going to pay for them. Just make it happen. It's got to be more of an open discussion with all three of those entities. And therefore, the county needs to be as big a player in it if we're dealing with a state highway as the town.
And I think, certainly in the last, 3 or 4 years that I've been involved, those types of conversations have occurred. There is not perfect alignment in terms of responsibilities and authorities and goals, right? I mean, I think the state, for example, take a Pine Grove traffic impact study. The state gets that study and says, yeah, developer ought to do X, Y, and Z at, 48, at 301 and 6, at, what have you. County gets it and says, well, they ought to be fixing Washington Avenue at Heritage Green Parkway or Roswick Road at radio station, right? So there's the stars are not necessarily aligned. I mean, those communications can occur and, there's puts and takes to it all. But the incentives are not always aligned. The standards are not always aligned and the authorities aren't always aligned. One of the problems has been, and for better or worse, developers know this, is this kind of triangulation that occurs. The town doesn't really have has not put any authorities in place, such as an APF, in order to necessarily regulate traffic. The town has had to rely on the county and or the state working its will on behalf. And so while that communication occurs, I mean, to be very candid, a lot of times you will have, and I'm not casting aspersions or pointing at any particular developer, a developer will go to the town and say, well, the state approved it. And the town will say, well, okay, so that's not really what we wanted, but the state approved it. So the town has to go along with the county approved it, but the state wasn't excited about it, but this kind of, but they approved it kind of problem. So the authorities are not aligned as much as the communications are, very robust. It's difficult. So having an APF certainly helps to rectify that because, the state, generally speaking, except with regard to access onto its facility, they're not going to require a developer mitigation improvement. They don't have any authority to require that if a developer builds 700 houses, that developer must improve the intersection of 301 and 6. They don't have that authority. The only authority they have is whether or not that access gets, or how that access gets provided, say, to Maryland 6. Right? So again, it's getting alignment, and that's the hardest part. And then the last one is, to what extent does growth within La Plata affect the adequacy of the transportation system? And, clearly, I think in many ways, the smaller or the lower classification of the road, the more it does. Those roads, however, aren't, again, necessarily town roads or even county roads. But the other part of it is that, La Plata is, a drop in the ocean on 301, right? There are much larger forces at play. And so, how much does any one development, affect the operations of 301? Not significantly. Now, as we're talking about, for example, in the Southwest, when you have the potential for 1,600 units, 1,600 units adds 1,000 peak hour trips onto 301. But, no individual development necessarily moves the needle all that far. So I didn't come here to argue against APFs, but simply to say that no, that an APF is not the panacea, nor some of the other alternatives that we'll talk about. Next slide, or next two slides. So what are the goals? Right, that's really what we start from. What are the goals and what are some options to get there? So the town has adopted through the comp plan several goals, right? New growth areas provide or support adequate multimodal transportation capacity, provide for that reciprocal review among the town, the county, and the state we talked about, focus the town's community and economic development efforts on the downtown core. So, one of there's this kind of perverse situation has occurred in many in the smart growth context where we want, in core areas, we want higher standards of urban design. We want, higher standards of stormwater management. We want higher standards of this and of that, and we want adequate roads. We want, kind of pile on, pile on, pile on. And so it becomes a lot cheaper to actually develop in the outer parts do greenfield development, right? And so one question is, do you want to make it more expensive to develop in the outer parts and cheaper in the inner parts, right? If you're trying to attract capital to downtown, do you want to add a burden, whether it's an APF burden or an impact fee burden or whatever it is, to that downtown development? You could apply that same question to stormwater or, anything else. But it's an interesting juxtaposition that we put ourselves in the state over the last 30 years since we've had smart growth. 301 access management and walkability. Right. So those are the goals. And then there's a series of projects you've articulated in the comp plan, which are in that map on the right. So what are some approaches to meeting the goal? And maybe I should actually pause there for a second. What's the goal?
What's our goal?
What's your goal? What are you trying to do here? And maybe I can talk about approaches and then we come back and talk about that. Didn't mean to put you on the spot there. So I would say there's kind of 4 routes or 5 routes we could take. One is do nothing, obviously. One is you could broaden the use of, and I'm going to use this not as a formal term, but developers' rights and responsibilities agreements or improvement packages or negotiated agreements or whatever you want to call them, right? There certainly gives you lots of flexibility with regard to timing, cost, thresholds, et cetera. Sometimes those become a lot of political hot potato and become very subjective in their negotiation, where everything is negotiable. And so you may not end up, at the best place from a technical perspective. That said, rarely will you end up at the best place from a technical perspective in any of these, but it is what it is. So that's one approach, to kind of broaden the use of the negotiated agreement tool that you.
So before you move on to the next one, if I recall correctly, we actually have one of those for Pine Grove. Is that correct?
That's through the county. The town would, so we had adopted the DRA ordinance code. Oh. Thank you. We had adopted a development rights and responsibilities agreement ordinance, and it was repealed and removed from the code. So during that weird time period, the county, the applicant for Pine Grove had come forward and they wanted to reinstate that DRA through the county. And because we had added that to our code, we were a party to that and we signed it, and that was the end of that. But now that it's removed from our ordinance, we now no longer have that kind of mechanism. It's still a state code, so it's still an option to pursue that, but it is not specified in the town code. So it's a little convoluted.
It's good clarification. Thank you.
I would add a couple of wrinkles on that. Certainly when planning commissions, make approvals, they can make approvals with all kinds of conditions and requirements, et cetera. So that's another way to get to a DRA. There's nothing that necessarily prohibits other means of getting to a negotiated package of improvements. And I think that's especially important in these large scale developments where, and as Commissioner Mudd indicated, we know kind of what the aggregate impact could be, and we, may have to, kind of tweak things along the way, but it would be good to know going in kind of what the guardrails are. And I think that's good for the developer and good for the government agencies.
Chairman Gann, I have a question. So we have several major developments coming online and basically approved. How does having an APFO now assist us? You can't go and apply anything that we put in this document to the existing, and I can't even imagine any additional growth, outside of what we've got going on. So why do we need it now?
So that's an excellent question, kind of one that I had towards the end, but I think the application of APFs to places where you have pretty well-defined growth is really a function of where things are in the process. So yes, we know in quadrant X, I'll take the Southwest and can speak very broadly about this because I don't know all the phases of this and that. Some things would be grandfathered, some wouldn't, some have other approvals still to come, some don't. So I think it's a matter of applying, you'd have to do a little bit of analysis of what would and wouldn't necessarily get approved. That's why another tool might be more appropriate that doesn't rely on the police power of land use regulation, but relies, say, on your taxing authority, for example.
I think for the long term, that's what we're looking at here. The annexations that we're looking at now, if there's any future annexations, that's really what this would definitely impact. But it also gives us a mechanism, and under the zoning code as it stands right now, we do have vested zoning rights. So I had put in a couple comments that we need to check that and see if there's anything that we need to change or edit with that. So as it stands in the vested zoning rights, that if there's a property or a development that was approved at a certain point prior to the adoption of that section of code or that ordinance, it would be grandfathered and it would be exempt from the newer regulations unless they change something, they come back and want to amend. So there's certain provisions where, you know, and it happens all the time. They want to come back and they want to amend something. Well, if they want to come back and amend, then they're now subject to the APF. But it also gives staff a mechanism to plan. So I know Jamie's here and he's really talking about traffic and that's his expertise. There are the water, sewer, and school seat elements to this. So it's not that, you know, overall, we're saying, you know, do we want an APF? We do need an aspect of an APF in our code. And really, water and sewer is going to be a big part of that, especially as we move forward, because we have a finite number of water allocations. So we need to either figure out a way to obtain more water or we need to limit development. So that is something that we definitely need to plan for and think about how we're going to handle that. So he definitely has some good points about the traffic side. Do we want a full APFO for just traffic? Or do we want to implement some other tools as well? So I think that's the core to this is we are going to have an APF that's really going to have the school seats, water, sewer. Do we want an in-depth traffic section? Do we want to implement other tools or a combination thereof?
So you bring up a comment that I was going to save this comment till later when we talk about the draft APF. When I went through that draft document, the concept of grandfathering came into my mind, and I didn't see anything in there that would talk about that. But I'm hearing you say that that's.
So, and that's, I will point out that the draft that's online, and I know, you know, he didn't want me to include that yet, but for transparency's sake, I know we're trying to make sure that that's why I sent this to Charles County. I sent it to the Board of Education. This is a very, very preliminary, rough draft. The traffic section has not been touched at all. So it was literally me just throwing stuff in there. Like I found this in Cecil County and here, this is in Calvert. I don't know, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I don't know. So the water and sewer sections have been reviewed by Macron and they did provide edits. And then you will see that the Board of Education and Charles County did provide comments, which I attached to the agenda as well. So you could see what they had to say. So it's really looking at this cumulatively, but the traffic is a little bit different. It has a little bit more involved since there's so many different people involved, state, county, town, developers. It's a little bit broader.
Can
Back to
I
you,
add?
Jamie?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I just ask a clarifying question? I thought I heard you say that if the town put in place an APF, traffic APF, where there is a state or county road intersection or border, we wouldn't necessarily have the authority to enforce that APF?
That's right. I mean, typically it would, trying to think of a good local example. But whatever the example would be, yes, the state or county would have to consent to its facility being modified.
So then just to pull that thread a little further, the purpose would be what? I guess it goes back to what Chairman Gaines said. It's important that we communicate
That's,
and engage often with the state and the
Absolutely.
county.
And then the question becomes, what is the right tool? And again, so to some extent, the town becomes the tail wagging the dogs. And in some cases, the town is the dog. When it comes to land use authority, you are the dog. When it comes to your roads, you're the tail. Right? Sometimes you're the hydrant, sometimes you're the dog. Is that?
I have no idea.
Yes.
Either is unappealing.
Disagree.
So this is John Mudd, listening to interesting conversation here. The reality of it is that, this is not a simple proposition for traffic and roads. The reality is you have 3 jurisdictions, all concerned with their individual roadways, but collectively, the town of La Plata wouldn't exist unless you had all of those different kind of roads. And to me, it's incumbent on the town to meet that issue head on, to develop a relationship with the State Highway Administration, to refine a development with the county, and work together collectively towards the common goal. The common goal is improved traffic conditions, whether that's on 301, at the intersection at Route 6 and 301, or pick any spot within the grid. All of the agencies and all the jurisdictions have a vested interest in the same outcome. So to make it sound like it's an impossible task to get all these agencies to agree is not the case. I worked over 40 years working very closely with these agencies as necessity required. So again, I'd rather hear a more proactive, positive attitude rather than this, it's going to be tough, not much we can do. There's everything we can do, and I think the adoption of a good APF ordinance is really a first step. Thank you.
back to you, Jamie.
Okay, thank you. So the next set of tools, and I will lump them together in one respect, and you may or may not know the distinction, the practical distinction, would be an impact fee or an excise tax. The impact fee being the basic rule being that you have to use the impact fee with a rational nexus to where it is collected. So you couldn't say collect a fee, in the far southwest part of town and spend it in the far northeast part of town. There needs to be a rational nexus. An excise tax, however, you can collect it and use it for whatever purpose you'd like. Whether capital, operating, east, south, northwest, you just have much broader authority. Some local governments are more trusting of themselves than others. And we'll use an excise tax, but then when times get tough, they'll draw on that excise tax. Some like to have the impact fee so that it is, clearly dedicated. Then there comes the question of what is rational nexus and how much, kind of is the local government willing to, how are they willing to define rational nexus in a way that's defensible? So we can get into those things, but whether it's a fee or a tax, it does have a certain amount of administrative simplicity. 1,200 units times X number of dollars equals 1,200X. Good math there. And you pay your fee and at the time of permit or over some schedule and you move on, right? It's very transparent to the developer right up front. They know exactly what to plug into their pro forma. They don't have to negotiate with the benevolence of a Janine and how she's feeling on any given day. It's very simple for them to program. The downside is it doesn't necessarily assess the very specific impacts of any very specific project. So you may collect a fee for a small development, let's say there was a subdivision being built off of Maryland 6, south of 6. Well, there is certainly a nexus, how rational it is, one can, debate with some improvements that need to happen up Radio Station Road, for example. I should have said south of 6 near Radio Station, let's say. Well, maybe the next project that really needs to occur is on Radio Station at Rosewick. It's not necessarily a radio station at 488, right? Or Maryland 6 at 488. So at least gives you have the tool now with the dollars to address the general need in the area. But when the public comes in and says, well, wait a second, X developer didn't fix the problem that they caused, you have a little bit less to work with there. However, at the other side of that is a 40-unit development or a 12-unit development, frankly, doesn't generate that much net new impact on a network that's already carrying 10, 12, 14,000 hours in the peak, right? And so you can't reasonably expect, a developer of a 12 or 40 unit community to go and do a $7 million intersection improvement, right? It would not pass any kind of legal muster. So it is an indirect means of solving problems, but it is, also flexible means of doing so. The next two are, I guess, two sides of the same coin, which would be you could adopt an APFO, right? You could adopt the county's APFO, take it as is, and say, county PGM, please, administer this on our behalf, hook, line, and sinker. I'm sure Ms. Harrington would not mind that at certain times. The council and planning commission may not be so excited about it. But it does set then a single standard for all developers, operating in the area to have to work by, right? And I think there's a fair amount of frustration on the part of developers, traffic engineers, planners, others, that, that same triangulation issue. I got to meet this standard. That standard is different than this standard. I got to collect that data for here, but they want this data. They want it for critical lane volume, but they want it for highway capacity manual, and they want it, right? And you end up producing much more heat than light with some of these traffic impact studies. So, it sets a single standard. At least we're all playing by the same set of rules here. That said, again, some elements of the county's APFO are not tailored to the smaller town, and they don't necessarily capture infill development as you would like. So, that's adopting it hook, line, and sinker is kind of one end of the spectrum there. You could also then go in and perform surgery on the county's APF and say, Town of La Plata adopts the county's APF except for A, B, C, D, and F, right? And that, it does add that second or third layer of requirements to the other studies. It does make it a little bit simpler to administer, but you can then, narrowly tailor that bigger requirement down to what your needs are here.
Thank you. I had the question, I was going to ask the question, do you have to adopt it in whole or can you adopt it in part? So you answered that question.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, how are we doing on time? She's tired. It's only 7:30. I mean, I figure I've got another good 10 minutes till bedtime. So, I could go into all of these how do other jurisdictions handle their APFs, and I'll maybe just kind of tease out the types of issues they work through and use that as a means of getting that last set of questions. So that, you have to set thresholds, right? How many units is it before you have to conduct a study? So in Calvert, it's greater than 400 two-way trips or 40 peak hour trips. In Charles County, it's 140 vehicle trips or per 24 hours or 14. St. Mary's, it's greater than 500 square feet of non-residential development. I mean, it's all over the place. And some of that is local politics, some of that is tied to technical standard, some of it is throw it up in the air and see what sticks, right? But it's all over the place. So we'd have to decide on a threshold.
But I do want to point out that you notice these are all counties. You don't really see municipalities with their own APFO.
Yeah.
And so that is one thing that I do want to point out is I tried, that's one of the reasons why I was like, why don't we get them to help us? Because there isn't a lot of examples to choose from for a municipality.
Yeah.
So it is something to think about.
Primarily, I think Montgomery County's municipalities are the ones that really have their own sets of standards, and they typically are just tailored versions of the counties.
That doesn't work, right? I mean, in some aspects, maybe, but not for the bigger picture, it doesn't, because we're different as a municipality. We have more, I think, unique attributes that we have to take into consideration.
I mean, yeah, you may put, you know, define, back to one of the questions, defining what is, you notice at the title slide, I didn't put APF for roads. I put APF for the transportation network. Well, you may define the most important part of the transportation network as being sidewalks or lack thereof, right? Or bicycle paths or lack thereof. You know, you can define it, you know, as long as you defend it any way you want. And I think, you know, the counties certainly there's nothing wrong with the counties. It certainly, you know, spends 98% of its time focused on roads. And I suspect that even if you took in a more aggressive posture, 90% of yours would still focus on roads. But, you know, it goes to how you define what terms you want to define that are kind of your own, that you want to tailor. How do you handle subdivisions? Some great conversation tonight about Pine Grove. You know, do you want to start out by saying, okay, you're bringing us your 20-year development plan. You know, you think your maximum units is 1,400. Let's see what that looks like, and then come back and, you know, periodically, you know, take a look. Some jurisdictions say, hey, 40 units at a time, you know, bring a little traffic study here, a little traffic study there. The problem with that is you never end up mitigating anything because you can't really mitigate anything with 40 units. There's no economics, you know, to that on the developer side. And the developers can rightly say, you know, look, there's no, you know, legal basis for making me mitigate 40 units, you know. So what's the right study area? In some jurisdictions, it's, you know, a half a mile, and some it's the nearest arterial intersection, and some it's, you know, the second mailbox, you know, on the left. I mean, it's all over the place, right? Background growth is pretty standard that, you know, you consider a certain percentage per year of traffic that is happening but for your development. You know, what are the background improvements that are going on? So what is the state or the county or the town already have in their capital program? So if, for example, you know, 301 and 6 were already programmed for a $6 million upgrade, the developer would be able to assume that at a certain point that improvement were already in place, right? And wouldn't be expected necessarily to pay for it unless it was the condition thereof. But so it depends on kind of the timing of capital improvements. What are your standards? You know, you know, is it level of service A, B, C, D, E, or F is acceptable? You know, is there a multimodal level of service? You know, kind of what do you want to choose from? And then mitigation. This is what really everybody, I think, at the end of the day cares about. Right? The whole technical analysis stuff kind of goes out the window for most of the public-facing elements of this. And the question is, so what is going to be done typically by the developer to do that? And I think that's not really the right question, but that is often the public-facing question: is what is the developer going to do? You know, you've got this question of rough proportionality that has to be met. In Charles County, I think the rule is basically you have to offset the increment. So if you add, you know, 1/10 of 1% onto a failing network, you have to mitigate to 1/10 of 1% on that network. Well, what does that possibly mean? Right? How do you possibly do that? So it ends up being kind of meaningless in some respects. You know, Cecil County, it tends to use more of a negotiated agreement kind of approach. Carroll County encourages actually the developer depositing funds in the capital improvement program accounts so that the county can use that money to make certain improvements over time. So those are some of the kind of considerations. So here's the final things. You could say we want an APF, and my first question would be to you, what do you want it to say? Right? To do what? So some of the discussion questions, discussion issue, you have, as you indicated, a reasonably well-known set of development plans. The timing may vary, the timing may not pan out. It may be 100 units, it may be 80 units, it might be 120 units, but there's a rough count based on zoning and what the developer can market, et cetera. So you have that in place, and some of them have already approved plans that make it a little bit harder, as you indicated, to come back. So how do we want to deal with that? Your multimodal system isn't well developed, so you can't tell a builder even of 1,600 units to go build the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit line. But do you want to really emphasize pedestrian connectivity, right? And so have a pedestrian level of service standard. The town desires to encourage downtown development. So do you simply basically draw a circle around downtown and say, if you're between, say, Willow Lane and Washington Avenue from, here to there, you're exempt, because that's our economic development priority, is to develop in the downtown, or exempt if you're less than X. So in Bel Air, if you generate less than, it's a significant number of trips, I want to say it's like 200 trips, you're exempt from any traffic mitigation requirements if you're in the downtown core, because they've been trying to push residential development back into the core. I would say US 301 is in many respects, with any development that we built along 301, unmitigatable, right? Very little any particular developer can do. So, and Maryland 6 is very constrained by right of way, and you've got the railroad line. So how do all those things kind of factor into this as well? We talked about developments in progress. My favorite one of these is, how many studies do we possibly need to do, is kind of, I think Mr. Mudd was alluding to arrive at the same answer. I mean, I think of when I first started as deputy director at the Baltimore DOT, I was chairing our traffic impact mitigation review panel. And I went to my first meeting about 2 weeks into my service, and there was a proposal for a Walgreens at the corner of Alisana and Central near Harbor East, if you know it. Fine. I thought it was kind of silly because it was a Walgreens, and what does it really generate, but whatever. The next month's panel, there was a proposal for a CVS at Walgreens or at Central and Alisana. And, being my absent-minded self, I said, didn't we do this one a month ago? I said, no, this is CVS. I said, well, wait a second. It's the same square footage. It's the same use. It's got the same trip generation characteristics. Why would we possibly make somebody spend $12,000, $15,000 to study this? How many times can we study the same developments over and over and over and over and over? Again, more heat than light in my view, in most instances. You asked me about this a few planning commission meetings ago, and I think traffic impact studies are of exceedingly lesser value as time goes on. Are on-site improvements considered mitigation, right? Does installing a new traffic signal mitigate an adverse impact, or does it create an adverse impact? Right? I think, again, this goes back to depends on who you are, right? If you're the state, notwithstanding wanting downtown La Plata to be a very vibrant place, a signal at Willow and or La Plata Parkway and Maryland 6 is just like one more thing you don't need to make the network work, right? If you're the town of La Plata, you want that because it's important to traffic safety, pedestrian safety, and maintaining your downtown street grid and feel. So it depends on where you are in the pecking order of things. So is providing that signal, is that an expectation of access to your development, or is it a mitigation that you should get some kind of credit for doing? We talked about, how do you wrestle 3 levels of government into a common review and single set of comments and standards and kind of clearly articulate that to an applicant, and what are the right thresholds for doing all this. So I got more questions than answers, obviously, but in order to write something, you got to tell me what to do.
I also I had a thought. I know, it's dangerous. Sometimes happens. As you were talking earlier, you were talking about the fact that we have the comprehensive plan, which is more broad kind of goals, nothing too specific, but, future roads, things that we kind of want to see happen. We have a transportation plan, which was from 2009. Are we due to update that? Is that something that we could create a state, town, county, more developed plan to the specific areas and what we want to do?
She didn't set me up for this. So let me tell you how the Baltimore City Traffic Mitigation Ordinance evolved. Good friend of mine who was then a council member in the Harbor East area. His constituents were very frustrated with traffic and the rapid growth of the Canton waterfront, Harbor East waterfront, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he threw together, in my opinion, a slapdash traffic impact study mitigation ordinance and basically threw chaos into the development system. It created a functional moratorium, not because it set bad standards, but because the process was a complete unmitigated disaster. And so things were gummed up for 18 months. And this very question of development on top of development and what are the right thresholds, and are we really trying to move more cars more quickly through downtown Baltimore? Is that what we're trying to do here? Oh, yeah, maybe we should think about this. So the city moved to a impact fee approach and said, X number of units or X number of trips generated pays Y fee, and that goes into a fund for the Southeast Transportation Master Plan. Or if it's on, over near if Baltimore, over near, down to this kind of Port Covington, Under Armour area. If you're in that area, you pay a fee into the fund. City adopts a plan for that area. City decides how that money gets used as long as that project is in that plan, right? That's an approach that I think has worked very well for more compact areas. You have a plan, you have a plan to fund the plan, right? And that the funding is both development contributions, town monies, state contributions, county contributions, what have you. That I think is a good balanced approach. And maybe you then set a threshold, except any development that's greater than X number of units does have to do some type of, further study. That would be one approach. And that approach is working very well, in Baltimore right now. Montgomery has actually moved to something like that more recently. Howard County is wrestling with going that direction. Anne Arundel County is wrestling with going in that direction. So I think actually that's probably marrying the planning mechanism, the funding mechanism, the governance mechanism is you all through the capital improvement program to decide how the monies get spent.
This is definitely a complicated issue. It's not a simple fix. We're getting a lot of comments. We're seeing a lot of feedback from the community about their concerns. Unfortunately, we're a single vehicle oriented area. There aren't a lot of other options. And so when you think of the number of people that are coming to, from south to DC, from St. Mary's to here, all over the place, there's too many cars and there's too much traffic. So how do you reasonably look at this from a planning perspective? It's not easy.
So we have a lot of questions that we need to have answered, and the APFO would do that. I think we look at the questions, the problems that we're trying to solve, and we go from there. It's just not traffic. We have other issues, the developments, the one that we're looking at now with the Southwest Quadrant, all of the developments that were built in that same line that only have, one egress, ingress. And so we need to address those issues, but we also need to make it walkable. We need to make the town something that folk would enjoy being in, coming to or, navigating without having to think about the traffic. Railway, I think Senator Ellis talked about it, light rail often, hadn't seen it. Buses, you know, maybe more transportation buses, because most of the folk that leave here, 70% of them are going to DC to work. They leave the county 70%. So how do we make that easier for them without having so many cars on the road? I mean, we have lots of questions, and I think the APFO would definitely address those. We just need to put it in a format like what you're trying to do and make sure that we're answering the questions that plague us.
But yeah, I definitely, like I said, it brought to mind because I was also thinking about our annual report, which I'll touch on with the planning department updates. But they always ask, have you updated, when was the last time you updated your transportation plan? Well, it hasn't been updated since 2009.
I would argue slightly differently that you updated it when you did your comprehensive plan in
Mhm.
2019. Speaking against
Mhm.
my own corporate self-interest here, I don't think you need to update a transportation plan.
Mhm.
I think you have, maybe there's little pieces that need to be tightened up, but I think you have one in your comp plan. That's why you do a comp plan. I disagree with the state on that question. There's nothing that requires you to do an individual element plan. There is for water, wastewater. There is
Yeah.
for school allocations
Yes.
but not for transportation. And I would say you have your comp plan, you have your goals, you have your projects. Maybe in certain areas you need to tighten things up a little bit. But
Well, what's the recommendation for next step? Where do we go from here?
not that you were on the planning commission, we're just staff.
I mean, I've got opinions, but
That's what we came to hear. I mean, I think I can't draft, I certainly have my thoughts, but I want to get some feedback before we draft.
I'll share my opinion. I've never been a big fan of impact fees or excise taxes, fee in lieu of, those kinds of things. I'm not a fan of those because I think that sets up what's the opposite of some standard? We want to look at the whole town and we'd like to make sure the whole town is addressed in a similar fashion. Well, you could have some developer with big deep pockets come in and on one side and say, okay, what's it going to cost? You guys, here's the money, go ahead and do what you want. And another side that doesn't have that kind of money, but still has a nice proposed development. I think some kind of an APF helps us set up a standard across the town that could work. Now, I also am not in favor of starting from scratch. I mean, the county has one. Much of what the county has probably can work for us. And we could, lack of a better word, fiddle with the details to make sure that the rest of it could work well for the town. So based on the options that you showed up there, I guess I moved toward the APF and modifying the one that the county already has. But it also, the whole thing goes back to what I said earlier, what Commissioner Banks said. None of this is going to work unless we always have a concerted effort to communicate across the three agencies, state, county, and town. That's my opinion for what it's worth.
I would offer my opinion as well. I agree with Chairman Gann. I think not starting from scratch makes sense. I think adopting the county's APFO in part and then catering it to the needs of the town, given we have unique needs, would be a good start. It may also create some additional goodwill with the county and help us to continue to engage with them and communicate with them around how we can work better collaboratively and together to make the whole thing work for the citizens.
And I think that, for the most part, the town and the county and the state, they do have good working relationships. I've seen some of the communications and the conversations. I think that to adopt the counties because it is, probably the most expeditious way, I think we would have to really read it and delve into it. I think we all have concerns that maybe that particular APFO would not address. So I think without delving into it and taking a good look at it, making sure that it answers the questions that you have, the questions that I have, the questions that Director Harrington has, because she sees more of the issues affecting our town than we do. We see them in silos. And so with that understanding, you know, taking a good look at it to see if it addresses the concerns that we have, the concerns that you have, and then we go from there. I wouldn't just think to take it because you've been utilizing it, you know, all along, and it's not really addressed the concerns that we have. We've not looked at the county's APFO. That's what she refers back to often. I think it does not address all of our concerns. So therefore, we need to look at what does, you know better than us, what doesn't, and then where do we need to fill in the holes?
Commissioner Johnson and Mudd, do you have any further comments?
Yeah, John Mudd here. I definitely agree the town needs to adopt an APF ordinance. To say that to copy Charles County's document is certainly a possibility. And I don't think we should just throw that out the window. To my knowledge, Charles County has in the last 2 years refined and upgraded their APF ordinance. I can tell you that based on my tenure, the APF ordinance in Charles County worked. You can point to projects that were problematic, but it's a tried and tested mechanism that has worked very effectively in Charles County. So there's a track record that demonstrates that, and that hopefully would ease concerns. I agree that it needs to be refined and tuned to small town issues that the county program may not address. Walkability, pedestrian access. I can't stress that enough. I mean, that's what everybody in the town wants to see. And I think we really need to provide a lot of focus in the future on that. And through the APF ordinance is a way to do it. The draft that I've looked at previously for tonight is very ambitious, and I applaud the movement towards including water and sewer. School allocations is an important topic, and I'm pleased to see that the point of view taken is that it's really going to take a coordinated effort between the town, the Board of Education, and Charles County to come up with an effective school allocation process for the town. So those are all very encouraging items I found in my first review of the draft. But I think that's where we need to be headed. And those are my thoughts at the present time.
Commissioner Johnson, are you still online? Do you have any further comments?
I don't have any further comments.
So I think I'm hearing there's some kind of a consensus toward using the county APF as a starting point and working from there for something that will work well for the town of La Plata.
Definitely. And I do want to make sure, Mr. Heim with the Board of Education did come tonight, just in case anyone had any questions. They did provide comments on the school seat allocation section. Majority of it, I completely agreed with, and I had actually started to amend those sections of code. I know I had 2 questions that would be part of a bigger discussion. One is on how the where available capacity would be. It was comment number 3. And then number 5, just the allocations and expiration date. If we want to match the county's policy on that, or if there's any thoughts on it. Those are the only 2 things that I had questions on, and I think should be part of a bigger discussion. But otherwise, I appreciate them taking the time and reviewing everything and providing their comments. If you do have any questions for the Board of Education, we do have a representative tonight.
Well, thank you, Mr. Heim, for being here and being patient. And Jamie, a lot of work went into your presentation. We really appreciate that.
So we know there's some urgency to move this forward, and Janine and I have been discussing perhaps doing a work session on the evening of the 17th or 18th.
So 17th is town council.
17th is town council.
Mhm.
So we could do it before or after town council, or we could do it on the 18th. Hey, you're here for a meeting, might as well be here for 2 or 4, right? Easy for me to say, right? Um,
All righty. Anything else on this subject? Jamie, thank you very much.
thanks. All right.
Okay, we're not done. We still have um, the election of chair and vice chair. It's that time of the year the planning commission shall elect a chairman and a vice chairman from among its members. The term of the chair shall be 1 year with eligibility for reelection. So does anyone want to make a motion for who should be the chair from this point on?
Chairman Gann, I'd like to make a motion that you remain as chair, and I would like to nominate Dawn Banks as vice chair.
We got 2 and 1. So we have a motion for me to continue as the chair and for Dawn Banks to be the vice chair. Is there a second on that? Or before I go to second, should I ask for any other nominations? I should ask for other nominations. Are there any other nominations?
I would this is Tracy Johnson. I would nominate Mr. Mudd to be the vice chair.
I'm hearing a nomination for Mr. Mudd as vice chair. Any other nominations? Okay, so let's go for the vote on chairman first. No, apparently, from what I'm hearing, I'm running unopposed. So I guess we could ask the town clerk serving as the secretary by vote of acclamation. I would accept continuing as the chair. Thank
Until
you.
November,
Thank you for
correct?
that vote of confidence. Say that again.
Until November, correct?
Oh, that's right. My term ends November 23rd. And at the present time, I do not intend to extend beyond that term. So everyone needs to be aware of that. So we have nomination of 2 members to be the vice chair. So I'll just do a vote on that. And so the question would be Commissioner Banks or Commissioner Mudd. And I'll start with Evelyn Bryant Ward.
Commissioner Banks.
Commissioner Banks. Commissioner Johnson.
Commissioner Mudd.
Commissioner Mudd. Commissioner Mudd.
Gee, I mean, how do you vote this vote, huh?
Are you voting for yourself or Commissioner Banks?
I'll vote for myself.
Okay. Do I have enough votes here? 1, 2, 3.
You didn't take Dawn's back.
Well, I would vote for Commissioner Banks, but that puts us in a tie.
Well, she didn't vote.
Oh, that's right. I didn't. I was wondering. Okay, that's where my blank was. I didn't fill out my sheet correctly. Commissioner Banks? You vote for yourself or Commissioner Mudd?
Thank you for the nomination, but I will vote for Commissioner Mudd.
Okay. Hearing that, Commissioner Mudd continues as the vice chair. And is the term for the vice chair also 1 year?
It's not delineated, but we've kind of, by policy, it goes along with the chair, so each
okay.
year. But again, since in November, we'll redo this since it's a little short, but we'll do
Okay.
it.
So
anyway.
Commissioner Mudd, congratulations. Continue as the vice chair.
Thank you.
Okay, matters of information, Planning Commission schedule. We discussed it at the last meeting and we changed 2 dates. So we're doing July 5th
Mhm.
and August 3rd, whatever that Wednesday
Yeah.
is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just the final draft that I'll put out on the website.
Right. So that's the way it'll go unless there's further objection or amendments from the commissioners now.
Huh? I don't know.
Does staff have comment here?
No.
Okay, do we need to take a vote on this? I I think we pretty much set this up at the last meeting.
It's August 2nd. It would have been August 1st, and we moved it to August 2nd, which is the Wednesday.
Gotcha. Okay. Alrighty. So, was this list in the package that came? Okay. So I would encourage each of the commissioners, please put this on your calendar to be aware. Looking forward, unlike last year, I see that I'm able to attend all these meetings through November. So, next item on the agenda, Planning Department project updates. Director Harrington.
All right. Last presentation of the evening. So for our planning department updates, we did hire a new inspector too. I guess he's not new. He was a Public Works Tech 1 and he has been promoted over to an inspector 2 with us over in the planning department. So he started today and we are very excited to have him. The Maryland Planning Commission Association has been set for January 31st from 1 to 4 p.m. So I hope all of you can attend. I know that hopefully you've received the invitation from Mr. Griffiths with the state at this point, but he is sending that out. So if you don't receive that, let me know and I'll make sure to get that to you. We are getting ready to kind of close out the urban tree canopy study that we were working on with the Davie Resource Group and the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. We kind of got the draft version that we're going through, and then we're going to move into the recommendation section. So hopefully by the spring of this year, we'll have that completed and finalized, and it'll give us a good idea on how we can address keeping trees, planting trees, maintaining our tree canopy in the town. Southwest Quadrant, as kind of was referred to tonight, we did our initial meetings and discussions on that, and we are getting into the more detailed reviews and detailed discussions with the individual property owners. So we'll be proceeding forward with that. Next slide. For our planning department priorities, obviously we have several code revisions that are proposed and on the timeline. Again, it's with our short-staffed a little bit. It's been a little slower than I'd hoped it would be, but we are trying to make progress on those. I am hoping to have Planning Commission rules and procedures at the February meeting. The town council adopted rules and procedures, and it's just a good document to have that kind of lays the basic policies and kind of guidelines for the Planning Commission. And, you know, our code section does have the main points, but it doesn't have the small details, and I hope this will help clarify some
Do
of
you
those
see
things.
any dramatic changes in the way we run business?
No, no,
Okay.
just clarifications and, you know, those types of things. And as I alluded to earlier, staff is working on a development capacity analysis. I've drafted it. It basically takes into consideration the development that we have approved and that's moving forward, development that's proposed and is kind of in the review and approval phase, and concept development. So those are the annexations, those are vacant lots, those are vacant properties that could be developed. We just haven't received any submissions for those yet. And I'm breaking them out into those three categories. And we are looking at the approximate number of units that they are approved for, that they're proposing, or that could potentially happen. If you look at the acreage and you look at the zoning, you can kind of determine, this could probably do, you know, X number of units. And we are trying to figure out what the total water and sewer capacity would be for each of those three sections. And we can determine when we're going to start running into issues with water. Sewer isn't as big of an issue because we have control over the wastewater treatment plant. We can modify it. We can make it bigger. And we do have plans for that. We do have that in our CIP. We do have different plans that are underway currently. I know that the council and our operations department are working on. So that's not as much of a concern because we do have direct control. Water is a different story. We have a finite number of water allocations. And that goes through the state and we have to work with the county as well. So that is something that we need to figure out the best path forward. I know that we are working on that and discussions are underway. So this was just going to help us kind of determine, okay, we're going to start reaching a problem at this point in the development scheme. And that can also help us with our development review because we cannot approve a site plan. We cannot approve a final plat if there is no water and sewer allocations, along with school seat allocations. So that is something that we need to prepare for and figure out and plan for these developments to know when there's going to be an issue.
So as you were describing that scope, I'm thinking of the comprehensive plan. We're still relatively early in the life of the current comprehensive plan, which is a 10-year plan. So the way you just described that scope, would that be kind of in line with our 10-year plan?
We're hoping so.
Okay.
Like I said, there is an increase in development right now, and I'm sure that has to do with the current economic status that we find ourselves in. And there's going to be booms and busts. You know, there's 2008 hit, the market crashed. We didn't get any development. We found that our water usage has been fairly consistent. There hasn't been really any huge spikes. Obviously, you'll have a month or so in the summer or different things like that, or an oddity that happens. But generally, our water usage has been fairly consistent, and it hasn't shot up wow, I can't say that word. Never mind. Astronomically, thank you. So that's something that we're working together to try to figure out the best way to present this information for planning purposes. I've drafted it. I've sent it back to our operations department. We're going to work with our town attorney and kind of put that together in a final format that we can present to the council and to our boards and commissions so everyone can see where we're at, along with the community members, and they can see what's going on with our development. And then finally, just a reminder that our annual report is due July 1st. And that's more of a reminder for myself because I have to put all of that together. So I'm going to keep putting this on there to remind myself. And that's all I have. If you have any questions.
Any questions for Director Harrington on her report? Not hearing any. Councilwoman, you have a council report? You do not. No council report. Is there anything else to be brought up for the good of the commission? Not hearing any. Whatever time it is, I call for adjournment of the meeting. And thank you all very much.
8:06.